Okay, everybody, welcome to week 4. We're at the end of this week. We will, of course, be halfway through the course, and that's hard to believe, but we are. And hopefully, you found the first 3 weeks to be interesting and to your expectation. I'm always open and to hearing any comments one way or the other about whether we're not meeting your expectations and how we might be able to do that if that's not the case, in order to give you a better experience. So one thing we will do at the end of this week is that I will be releasing the kind of an outline on the final. The final is, of course, due at the end of the semester, but it's going to be on Amazon and Walmart, and I want you to have plenty of time to do what I would call scholarly research. And heaven knows there is a lot of research available on these two behemoths in the retail market and their supply chain strategies and how they are competing against each other and how they are attacking the e-commerce market from very different ways with very different kinds of solutions. So I want you to have a chance to get started on it, to begin to kind of, build your references and your articles and all your various citations and attributions that you need to have to get started on that. So as you see things, just start to put them into a folder for yourself. So when you get to it, you can have some material already ready to go. So that will be your final, and it'll be due. I think it's a week after we finish week 8, the end of that week or the end of that final period. So go ahead and get started if you can, start writing your outlines and thinking about what you want to do. But to do that, you really kind of need to kind of study what's going on between those two companies and see what what people are saying about them, what the market's saying about them. And again, you'll find a wealth of information out there on this. So week 4 is all about procurement in the supply chain, and it's really just about the fact that procurement and logistics need to collaborate in order to create the best business result. And in looking at some of the research, the University of Tennessee here, which I'm referencing, the Haslam School did a recent research project on this very subject. So we're going to kind of go over some of the findings of it, and the findings are, this set of this deck has got some of their findings as well as some other findings that I have or I know of, and I'll intersperse some other examples in there as well as we kind of go through it. So I think you'll find this to be interesting. That's for sure. Okay, so Haslam went out and did a survey, looked at 180 supply chain leaders and firms of varying different size, but 20 billion to 100 million. For some of us, and I've been in a $20 million company, so this is, 100 million is still a big challenge. So you might say, well, this doesn't really apply to me, but yes, it does. It does apply to you, because it doesn't matter whether you're in 100 million or a million. The reality is you've got procurement and you've got transportation activities going on in the same organization, whether it's a manufacturing organization or even to some extent if it's a service organization. You still have these two activities going on. And the finding was, in looking at these companies, was that they tend to exist as two separate and disconnected functions in most companies. They have different metrics, they have different incentives, they have different goals, they may have different management, and whatever structure they have between the two of them is basically informal and unstructured. This has been my experience somewhat as well. The bigger the company, I think the more you're likely to see this. And basically they do tend to work kind of independently. They may be on separate ends of the same floor or even on different floors or whatever it is. But the collaborative opportunity between the two is a very real contribution to business results. Okay, so this is what Haslam concluded with, is that integrated procurement and logistics organizations deliver better business results. So that comes in a number of ways. It's all tied together by technology, so let's not kid ourselves. It's all driven by technology. We talk about technology, we're talking about visibility, and we're talking about, and visibility then brings KPIs and metrics and dashboards and performance, whatever, scorecards. So all of this gets back to the ability to be able to, through visibility, which is through digitization of the data, allows you to build a view, a framework, if you will, where you can start to identify shared metrics and work together to improve the metrics, even though there can be trade-offs across the two groups. From a business perspective, which this is where your finance guy comes in, if you don't have a chief supply chain officer, which most companies don't, you have the finance becomes the final arbiter. And you present the business case that says, here, if we do this, then this, and you need to have the buy-in of your colleagues across the organizations to make this work. So this is all about collaboration. It's about sharing metrics, not necessarily sharing incentives, but sharing metrics. I think the more that you have at least some amount of shared incentive, it makes it a lot easier to move some of this stuff forward, and base these decisions on total cost of ownership, not just piece cost and not even landed cost, but look at total cost. And there's a difference there, and we'll talk about that next week when we talk about manufacturing in the supply chain. And there we're going to spend a little bit of time on reshoring, which is where we get into the total cost of ownership discussion. Again, it's all tied together by technology and finance. And the other thing is you have to have people on your team who understand that, who understand the trade-offs between functions within supply chain and outside of supply chain, and be able to have the skills in order to communicate that, build the business cases, and then be able to present a solid argument, and then measure the results. So Deming basically said that this is what he said, and we're just repeating what we just said before. But I mean, working together is how organizations move forward and achieve a common objective. We had just a great example where when I worked for the German company, our Alfred Karcher, our incentives were based on 50% of our incentive was a shared incentive. So it was return on investment, return on assets, profit, sales, or whatever it might be. There were 2 or 3 different things that were shared. And then you had individual incentives, which was the balance of your 50%, which were based upon specific tactical things like reducing transportation cost, or doing this, or improving service level, or whatever it might be. And then everybody within the organization, in our case, throughout the organization, had what we call the center point. So they were even the administrative people were part of this program. So we have that shared incentive, and I will tell you that moved a lot of things out of the way. So whether you could implement something like that or look at something like that. Now that's Charlotte. Charlotte is seeing some dog walking by. But if you have a way to do that, even within an organization, you might find it to be an interesting way to do it. I mean, it worked very well for me, and we followed the same thing when I went into the reverse side. Is we made sure that we maintained that, where there was an opportunity to share up and down the organization. Okay, so now this is Ollie White. Ollie White's been around for years and years and years. He's primarily been in the inventory side of it, but his findings on a separate study was this, and I'm not going to read these to you. You can read them yourself. But clearly, even if you elect to buy into these kinds of numbers, which I personally would not do that, I would cut these back substantially, because even if I cut them back 60%, those are big percentages. And so, I mean, I do think that that the research is indeed clear that integrated decision making makes for a better financial performance. There's no question about it. Okay, so generally, if you think about it, procurement and logistics do represent a big chunk of organizational costs. This was true at Emerson, where we added up materials management and we added up logistics. We had almost 60% of the P&L was in those two buckets, and it really had never been looked at like that. So kind of created some new space there and added in some new factors and got people thinking about, whoa, this is a big chunk of what's going on. And it also, from the financial standpoint, if you think about, you remember what we talked about in terms of logistics costs, your working capital is all tied up in inventory and payables. So if you do a better job of managing logistics and you do a better job of managing materials and inventory and demand forecasting and policy making and all this kind of stuff, it has a direct impact, drops right to the bottom line, and that's the whole thing. But again, in most companies, we have this disconnect where procurement's looking at purchase price and logistics is focused on something else. Logistics is more focused now on service than it is delivery and storage. We're much more focused on that. So, but neither of these two, and in this kind of an organization, is looking at total cost, because the logistics side is not necessarily looking at this, and it's certainly not looking at. It may not be looking at financial value creation, and procurement isn't either. So again, aligning the incentives is a huge step if you can do it within your organization. Okay, so what we're saying here basically is that in order to collaborate, supplier selection needs to become a multidiscipline activity. It's led by procurement. I don't think anybody's going to argue that. And they are the ones who ultimately will be accountable for that supplier selection. But inputs need to come from beyond just procurement and beyond just a single factor in terms of choosing of why that supplier was chosen. And so that's what this is getting to. It's much bigger than that. It gets into not only cost and price, which will always be there and should always be there, but if you don't deliver a quality product, if you don't deliver on time, if you deliver short, or you deliver in a condition that can't be used, you're not reliable, all these things become a negative and are part of supplier management from a procurement standpoint. So it's much more than just this, it's all of this. The other thing is there's their trend towards supplier relationships, which we're going to talk about next. That is the idea basically that you do some sort of a risk analysis or a risk assessment, which is the Molson Coors case, where you're looking to not only identify risk, but also consider what's the likelihood of that, and then what's the impact if it does happen, and then how do you manage that risk? Either do you retain it or do you offload it to a third party, and then or how do you mitigate it? And in order to do that, you've got to do a risk management assessment upstream and downstream and identify where those critical points are. And you want to do it before it happens. So that's what your business process people are doing right now, or should be doing, or could be doing, and your continuous improvement. I mean, you're trying to take risk out of the system before it happens, so that when it happens, or if, and it's not if, it's when, you have a recovery plan already in place, and you already know what you're going to do, and you've already thought it through. And so by identifying that risk, you prioritize that risk, and then you attack it like that. And so you may have a key supplier, and that there may be one supplier that you absolutely have to have. And so you manage that differently than your office supply guy. So again, this is not new ground. It's pretty basic stuff in a lot of ways, but now we're actually tending to do it and not talk about it. It's moved from academic into execution, if you will. And partnerships are very important because, again, if you think about something like cybersecurity, as we continue to complicate the supply chain, whether it's domestic or international, it really at the end of the day, you have to open yourself up to you really have to open yourself up to it's all about data and connectivity and visibility. Then you're letting people who you don't really know and you don't know their capabilities particularly to perhaps peek behind the firewall. So you may not want to do that. You may want to share data with some people, not share certain data with others. But if you're going to make a supplier relationship work, that's why you need to be specific about what you want to do and why there's a business case to do that. You have to share data, and so that's the other paradigm that's occurring. Okay, so you're going to share data. You're going to share databases. You're going to put a focus on quality. You're going to look at the cost from a supply chain standpoint, from a total cost standpoint. You may start at landed cost, but then you need to look at total costs when you look at it. And I think the other most important thing is not just look at one thing, but understand all the impacts of these decisions, which means that you need an operating team that understands it as well as you understand it. And again, the more extended it is, we talked about this in the week one, the more extended it is, the more complication it is. Okay, so what is this new paradigm we're talking about? Well, basically, the new paradigm is many of the ERP systems you have, whether it's SAP, whether it's Oracle, whatever it is, they have the ability to manage a lot of transactional type activities that you don't need to put resource on. Let the system generate that replenishment order based on a min-max, based on a Kanban. I mean, you don't do it if it's an important category. You're going to manage it just like you manage an A item, but you need to prioritize, stratify, and assign the risk level to each of these type of activities, and then decide what's the most efficient solution for this. And you may want to outsource it, such as transportation is a classic sense of that, or it's a classic example, or you may want to retain it. Again, this concept of a common database. Now, again, keep in mind the ERP is a common database, but it's generally internal. It's not external. So you're going to have a common database that's both internal and external, and is using the same data, but makes it available on an external basis, perhaps ahead of your firewall, so you don't let suppliers come in and get behind your firewall, because they could be hacked. It wouldn't be necessarily a supplier, but it could be somebody hacks that supplier, and as a result, because you have a purchase order with them, they have, they'll have a way or a path, if you will, to get beyond it. So, like I said, systems can do a lot of this basic stuff. So let it do that. That's what you bought it for. Concentrate on the exceptions. Concentrate on the variation in process. And what happens then is that the people that you're going to have working for you are not going to be writing purchase orders. They're going to be managing suppliers, and that's a different kind of a job. And so that's what this is saying, is that there's going to be few people writing purchase orders and more people managing suppliers. Now, in general, maybe you'll have fewer people in your organization, and you can redeploy the others, which of course is obviously the case. But it's going to be about data, and it's going to be about having the tools to drive the data down through your organization to the right person at the right time with the right information. And that needs to go beyond your organization. So that's where the ERP comes into place. You have to have the ability to share this information across the organization, and make sure that everybody has access to it as you work in a collaborative way. So it changes from just beating up people for price and leverage on round price, and it changes to how do we get speed to market? How do we gain share? How do we minimize our risk? Not only the risk of a supplier going out, but how do we minimize cybersecurity risk? How do we minimize transportation risk? How do we minimize customer risk? So the 3 to 5% in piece price in today's marketplace with the web, you have to assume that the people you're dealing with have competitors, and that so your price transparency is going to be there. So you want to look at the services over and above and outside of price and prioritize those and weight those within your supplier selection program. So that's what I think we're looking at now. So hopefully you found that to be of some interest. So this, I think this is the last slide, but so in essence, risk management transfers to procurement. As the leader of this, then this whole concept here then comes into procurement group, and it becomes part of sourcing and the contract. So it's not just about piece, it's about going beyond and saying, okay, how do you manage your data? Where's your firewall? How do you protect it? How far do we need to let you in? Is there another way we can do that without letting you behind the firewall? And you're going to have tools then that assess and monitor those risks. And these are probably going to be third party. They're probably going to be they may be within your ERP system, or they may be cloud-based. But if they're cloud-based, again, make sure you get somebody that's used to partnering with your ERP. And you're going to have to develop metrics here. And that metric is to make sure that if you have a supplier, for example, your ocean supplier, let's just take Hanjin, for example, is being financially challenged, you're experiencing firsthand what's happening with that. Your cargo still on the ship. The cargo that you had ready to move from South Korea into the U.S. or Europe or wherever it is still sitting in South Korea because there's no capacity to take it out yet. So you've had financial monitoring of your key suppliers, like an ocean carrier, in this case, or all ocean carriers now, because you now know if you follow this, or your transportation guy should be saying ocean carriers are under a tremendous amount of pressure and there may be further bankruptcies that we need to be aware of, and you need to start reassessing what carriers you're going to use. So that is the kind of thing I'm talking about. And I'm not going to beat this up. We said this over and over and over again. So I think that's the message. So here we come into this one. People are getting bigger, and the bigger they get, the question is how big do you have to be before you get interesting to them? So as the leverage shifts here, you have to worry about, when you think about third-party logistics companies, there's such a big M&A activity going on out there now, is that how big do you have to be before UPS Supply Chain Solutions is going to be interested in talking to you? And so you're going to have to make some commitments. You can't partner with everybody anymore. That's all part of the supplier relationship. But is it one of three, or do you want to have one or two? In some cases, there's only one key supplier. But in many cases, it doesn't hurt to have what I call tension in the supply chain. And so you have a primary, and maybe you have a secondary, and then you kind of monitor the two of them. But you keep some capacity options open to yourselves as you go along. So again, we moved away from commodity and moving into strategic ideas. And so this sums it up here. Basis of importance to continuity to business. All suppliers are not all equal. That's the whole point. And that gets down to the risk management. Okay.